Hey everybody, welcome to Podcast HQ here at Blackfriars House in Manchester. I'm Adam from Northern Powerhouse Media. Today, we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of getting started with your podcast. These are the basics. So look, if you've never done this before, it can be pretty daunting. If you've listened to podcasts but never made a podcast, where do you even start? Rather than making things complicated and us telling you what expensive microphones to get or what complicated bit of software, today we're going to talk about getting you off the ground with your podcast as simply as possible. In fact, by the end of today's episode, we're going to show you how to create your own podcast with nothing more than one of these and one of these. To keep things as simple as possible, we're going to break this down into three very clear sections. Number one, content. How do you put together the content before you start recording? Make sure that you're well prepared. Number two, equipment. What are the basics required to get going and actually recording your audio? Number three, post-production. Everything after you've done the recording. How do you take that raw piece of audio and take it through to a polished piece of content that you can then distribute across the internet? It's worth me mentioning before we go any further that you should take advantage of our current offer at Northern Powerhouse Media. We are offering a 60-minute consultation free of charge where you can speak with one of our podcast producers and talk about how you can bring your idea to life. In addition to that, we're also producing your first podcast absolutely free of charge. Once you've recorded it, you send it to us, we make it sound amazing, we send it back, you get it out on the internet, you get thousands of listeners, you love it, you get rich, and everyone's happy. Right, I'm going to hand over to Joel, who's our lead podcast producer. He knows all the ins and outs of all this stuff, so over to him.
So firstly, we're going to look at content. You've figured out why you want to do a podcast. You've figured out what your podcast's about. The next thing for you to do is a little bit of research. In terms of the content of your podcast, it's good to look at the 3 T's. That's your topic, your title, and time. Let's look at those one at a time. Have a listen to other podcasts with the same sort of topic. What are they missing out on? What's the style? What's the substance? Is there anything they're doing that you wouldn't do? Is there anything they're not doing that you would do? If not, maybe there's already too much content for that particular niche. The next thing to think about is narrowing down your topic. Is it about football? Maybe you could make it about a specific team. Is it about photography? You could be looking at food photography. It's hard to overstate how important the name of your podcast is. Your listeners will find your podcast by doing a search, so the topic of your podcast should form part of the title. There's no law that says you have to have the word podcast in the title of your podcast. Despite that, most people do. Whether you do or not, that's completely up to you. There's no law that says how long your podcast needs to be. It could be anything from 10 minutes long to 2 hours long, although we'd recommend somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour. You need to think about the average attention span of your listener and how long they've got. The average commute is about an hour long. You also need to think about the natural flow of the conversation and making sure that it ends naturally. There's loads of podcast tutorial videos on YouTube that go on and on about the equipment that you need. Now this is important, but it's not as important as having a great concept with some good quality content to back it up. In future videos, we'll be looking in more depth at the type of equipment that you might want to invest in. But this episode is about the basics and how you can get up and running with the simplest of equipment. Before you start thinking about recording your first podcast, it's a good idea to have a look around your room and a listen around your room. Surfaces to avoid include windows, mirrors, hardwood floors, so try not to record in your kitchen or your bathroom. The best sort of recording environment is going to have carpets, curtains, loads of soft furnishings, and it's also going to be somewhere where you're not going to be disturbed by a member of your family or a pet. So let's look at the basic equipment requirements for recording your podcast. You're going to need something that can record audio, and you're going to need something that can get that audio onto the internet. We've all got one of those in our pockets. So let's start by looking at how you can use your phone to start your first podcast. Okay, so firstly I'm going to open my voice recorder app. The next thing to think about is where to place your phone. I'd suggest not holding it in your hand, as the vibrations from your hand or your arm can be captured on the recording. If you've got a stand to put your phone on, that's great. Make sure you're pointing the microphone at your mouth from one side. If you haven't got a stand, get creative. So now I'm going to hit record. And making sure that I'm not speaking directly into the microphone and that my mouth is about this far away from it, I can start recording my first podcast. Do a test recording for 10 seconds, then listen back to it. Just check that you're happy with the quality of the audio. You should see a visual representation on your recording device. As a general rule of thumb, if the waveform's too high, you're too close and the signal will be too loud and possibly distorted. If the waveform's too low, you're too far away and your recording might sound a little bit hissy. If you've got guests on your podcast, whether they're on the other side of the room or the other side of the world, it's worth getting them to record on their devices as well. Loads of podcasts are being recorded remotely at the moment. If each person locally records their own audio, there's so much more opportunity at the editing stage to get everybody's voice sounding pristine. Once you've finished your recording, simply press stop, and then you're going to have to transfer all your files into one central location. You can do this with one of the standard file transfer methods such as WeTransfer or OneDrive. Once that's done, you're either going to send them to your podcast producer, someone like myself, or you might want to edit them yourself. If you're editing the content yourself, you might want to have a look at our other videos on using GarageBand for Macs or Audacity for PCs. Have a look at the links in our description. Once you're entirely happy with your podcast, the next step is to get it onto all the major platforms. In order to do this, you're going to have to choose a distributor. There are many distributors to choose from out there, and all of them do essentially the same job. The best thing to do is look at who's got the best deals currently.
Once the podcast production is complete, it's all about getting an audience. It's about building promotional strategy that's going to get your podcast in front of as many people as possible. And there's myriad ways that you could go about doing that online. So we've got some great new content coming in the next few weeks about more advanced techniques about producing your podcast, so stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe, like, and hit the bell button on our channel so you don't miss out on anything. In the meantime, if you've got questions about how to get started, you need some more help, take advantage of our current free offer of a 1-hour consultation with one of our producers and the offer of a free first production on one of your podcast episodes. You can get in touch via our email address, our telephone number, and you can get in touch via our socials as well. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.